I want to really echo what Marsha was saying about dealing with resistance, and that was a great summary of how to confront that. And anybody who's interested in digging deeper there, I can also point you to the chapter on power and ISIS agreement. Because if you haven't seen a power play coming your way in your organization in the sustainability context, then you better start looking for them. They do occur, and Marsha's absolutely right. It's something you have to be prepared for. What I wanted to do in this second half is show you some of the actual techniques we use in working with groups of all kinds. We're talking about businesses here, and of course, pretty much everybody's a business these days. NGOs seem to be businesses. Governments talk about their clients and customers. But I'm going to keep this focused on the business case. And I'm going to note that even in fairly sophisticated business environments, you have people who are at the beginning stage, the intermediate stage, and the advanced stage. And we spend a lot of time helping people figure out, when they wade into this world of sustainability, at what level their target groups are and who they're working with. So this is a graphically summarized version of a more detailed set of guidelines that we provide on how to assess whether people are at the beginning level of understanding indicators or are advanced enough that they can understand a fairly complex indicator set with indices, or whether they are at the very beginning stages of systems thinking. They're on the left, where you see two trends, the green and the red, and oh wait, there's a connection. One's causing the other. And my goodness, it's happened many times that connections that I thought were quite obvious were not so obvious, and the aha moment was at that beginning level for people. Or as you follow the systems row across to the right, you can see that some of the other techniques that we facilitate, for example, doing systems mapping, or even getting people engaged with computer modeling at the more advanced levels. Same for innovation and strategy. There's the simple versions of just identifying a really good new idea that might help you with that new system connection you've just understood. For example, gosh, as Marsha said, our natural gas that we're selling is causing global warming. We might need some new ideas there and change our system, to be simplistic about it. But when you get into a real case of working with companies and their supply systems and their value chains, or their relationships with the community, then the mapping gets very interesting, and the possibilities for identifying new ideas get interesting. And you do need some again, knowledge about what level of sophistication is appropriate. And then finally on strategy, too. Strategies can be very simple. Do I have the money? Do I have the people to do this? Or they can be a little bit more developed with written plans or even fairly quantified analyses of what's happening and what you're trying to accomplish in that space. So there's a summary of how this method can be adapted to a lot of different kinds of contexts, everything from schools to very sophisticated management teams. Again, being very specific here, here's one example from our Compass tool. Compass is a process, as I mentioned, for framing sustainability in that nature, economy, society, well-being way, also for leading people through the development process of making indicators. But here's a fairly sophisticated way to use it, where we help people develop indices, where 0 is the worst possible case, 100 is perfect. And there at the bottom, you can see a typical report, simplified report for a company showing on all of those dimensions, plus an integrated overview where they stand. And very often, as I think Marsha said earlier, companies think they're more advanced than they are. And we can benchmark them now against other companies in their sectors and show them that, wait a minute, you may think you're doing well, but you're only doing well on the society dimension, and you've left environment in the dust here. So Compass is very helpful for giving that kind of feedback and for putting all the indicators under a scale where you can compare them. This was the very first one we did almost 10 years ago now. In this case for a city, but we now do these for companies routinely. And just showing that in this particular case, that city's economy was actually not improving, and neither was their natural environment. And this was news to a lot of people, and the reasons for it, this is the important thing, became news to people as they investigated why these things were happening and found new system connections. That's the purpose for doing indicators, is to begin finding those system connections, as this next slide shows. And this is, again, an example of one of the more simplified techniques that we use. I'll be using it on Friday with a bunch of people who are doing management in Africa, for example. And that process shows how we just get people drawing pictures of cause and effects and looking for loops and looking for what we call leverage points, places where they might make a change most effectively in their systems. And we can do this, and we encourage people to do it, not just with formal indicators, like, for example, if you have your GRI report, your sustainability report, you can certainly do it with the data and the indicators that you have available in your organization. But you can also do it with informal indicators, and we guide people through a process of creating those. The things that everybody knows, but they just don't have data for. You can create pictures that are adequate for strategic planning purposes, and use those to then investigate the systems and the usually hidden cause and effect relationships, and especially the loops among them, the vicious cycles, for example, that exist. That's what we're trying to help people discover, so that, again, they can find the most effective leverage points for change. I mentioned with Amoeba, this little tool for mapping the cultural space around, as Marsha was talking about, the resistance, but also the support that you might get within an organization, and knowing where you are in that process and where other people are, who's going to be against you, who's not going to care, who's going to be the activist trying to storm the gates of your company and actually be useful by keeping the people who are against your sustainability initiative occupied and aware that there maybe is a need to change. So there's some techniques for identifying who's playing what role and how to essentially work with those differences and avoid the obvious sand traps and tar pits as you're moving your process forward.